And we are recording. What? And I didn't put in the stream key. Well, we're recording. We put in the stream key. Not quite yet streaming. Well, there'll be two different files, but for everybody listening, Dr. Kevin Barrett, I'll just wait until we're streaming. Give me one. There we go. All right, take two. And we are streaming on Thursday, February 13th, 2025, 12:20 p.m. Eastern Time with Dr. Kevin Barrett, who's been on here a handful of times before now. In the description is your Substack. It's with Truth Jihad. It's been a minute since we last talked, and but I wanted to talk to you about what are your thoughts on, or we can just take it in any direction you want, about the rather insane proclamation. And hey, I say this as a Trump guy that we're just taking Gaza. Like that, yeah, I know some people are like, oh, it's 5D chess. Yeah, I don't really see that. I don't know what it is. But we can take it in any direction on any topic you want. But Dr. Bear, I'm gonna post the live link around. How are you doing?
I'm all right. And yeah, I agree. It's Trump says some crazy things, but this is about as crazy as he's ever said, which is saying something.
Yeah. What is it derived from then? Is it, I mean, is it the whoops? Is it just the, the most obvious doing the bidding of Israel? Is this more, look at something like recently in Ukraine, he was like Ukraine's going to give us $500 billion in rare earth minerals in return for our military aid, which is surprise the military industrial complex is alive and well. I mean, I don't morally, ethically, it's all wrong. I get all that, but just from like an abstract kind of just trying to understand why it's happening. Like I get why they would be demanding minerals. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it humane, but I understand it. I don't understand the US saying that we're going to take Gaza.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it looks to me like the Trump administration is going a little bit haywire, and I think in some ways it's because some of these people recognize correctly the kind of stuff that people like us have been talking about, and people like Colonel McGregor and others have been talking about that the American empire is overextended and it can't really continue in this form forever. So there's a sort of a salvage operation, I think, or some of these people have in mind a salvage operation where the U.S. retreats from being a sort of universal, planet-straddling liberal empire that's part of a project to impose kind of neoliberal world governance with the U.S. in the number one position, retreating from that vision to a sort of a Fortress America version of the American empire, which would maybe be a somewhat smaller empire. And it seems like Trump's offering a sort of comic book version of that with these threats to invade Greenland and Panama and Canada and Gaza. Well, wait a second. So, of all of those, Gaza is the one that's way far away from us. It's not
Yeah.
part of the Monroe Doctrine, right? So, what's that about? Well, it does seem like, you know, you could interpret this as Trump is basically ending the American empire and pretending to do it in a way that is in line with the interests of Americans, which I don't think it is, but maybe he thinks it is. I don't think he's particularly well informed, has a very deep understanding of these matters. So what's actually going on, I suspect, is pretty much what Netanyahu announced that he was planning and doing back when he was recorded circa 1990 or whenever it was, or maybe it was in the 80s, in Fink's bar in Jerusalem, where he basically bragged that we're going to just squeeze the life out
Yeah.
of the U.S. and because we hate, that's what we do to countries we hate, and we're going to make it the world's biggest failed welfare state and until it's all gone, and basically just announcing that Israel is going to just drain the blood out of the U.S. and hang it out to dry, and that's what the Zionists have done. They did 9/11 and stole $8 trillion to hijack America's military power to try to destroy their enemies, which wrecked America's biggest asset, really, which is its soft power, and that put the U.S. on this road to terminating its empire earlier than otherwise, and in a much more unfortunate way for the U.S. than it would have otherwise. And I think the Zionists are finishing that process now. And I think Trump doesn't understand his actual role. And I think a lot of his supporters don't understand it either. That actually Trump is the tool that's being used to deliver the coup de grace to America. They're putting, the Zionists are putting the final knife in the back of the United States. And that part of that is expending the very last drop of America's soft power in supporting this genocide to the hills. I mean, all the way, way over the top in a completely ludicrous way. And it's part of this gamble for greater Israel. The Zionists are, whether or not they actually helped orchestrate or did a lie hop on October 7th, 2023, the way they reacted to it is that obviously they're pushing this as a an attempt to either they go down and they're going to be gone, which is what I think is going to happen, or they apparently think they have a chance of grossly expanding their borders and genociding 5 or 6 million Palestinians. And so I think Trump was put in office to do that. I think he was anointed by the Zionist organized crime cabal on July 13th of last year when they staged just a blatantly, obviously fake shooting in which Trump had to have been complicit. And the Zionists presumably have film of Trump practicing bursting that blood capsule that he did to get a little bit of blood on it, to put streak blood on his face after the Zionists murdered somebody and wounded a couple others at that rally. And then Trump pretended to be shot when no bullet ever came anywhere near him. So I think that was the anointment that announced that he was going to be president. The Zionists were going to insert him. When the opposition just dried up, it didn't even challenge that story. Sort of like when the opposition dries up and doesn't challenge the absurd stories of JFK or 9/11, that just gives them, they own you after that. And so I think the Zionists they put Trump in power to finish off the United States. And that's what Trump is doing. And this Gaza thing is finishing off the United States. And these crazy, brutal, gangsterish threats, to invade and occupy places like Panama, Greenland, and Canada are part and parcel of the same thing. This is going to grossly alienate the whole world. It's going to alienate America's former friends. It's going to do is it's going to take down the American empire. It's the only reason that the American empire persists is that the U.S. PR machine has been able to sell it as beneficial for its victims. So Europe has had its blood drained forever by the American empire. The whole world has. I mean, the American empire is basically, U.S. produces nothing except for green printed toilet paper from the Federal Reserve. And then it sucks in all kinds of actual real goods and services from the whole world. And it gets away with that by telling the world that it's actually benevolent and it's enforcing freedom and democracy and human rights and this sort of thing. And it's going to be a fair arbiter of all these disputes and this sort of thing. Well, that's over. Right now, the whole world sees this naked psychopath, Uncle Sam, grabbing and threatening and stealing and participating in genocide. And the whole world is going to turn against the United States now. The dollar will crash and the U.S. is going to burn. And Trump is the clown that the Zionist crazies selected to burn down the United States.
I hadn't thought about the soft power kind of angle before. I mean, I guess I always thought in very literal terms of like, use up the military, empty the treasury on, these bullshit wars where there's no clear. I mean, I get, yeah, the asterisk, yeah, yeah, all war is bad. I understand that. But in terms of just for like an empirical point of view, a war, you normally want to get something out of it, like conquer or just throughout history, enslaving, whatever it is. It's all bad, but it doesn't even make sense. Like what it doesn't, if you look at it from that point of view, like the global war on terror, it doesn't even make sense. You look at it and you go, we didn't eat, it's not that we went in and we did this and then took the oil. We didn't even take the oil. So you start to go, well, why did it happen? Who did it benefit? And another way to look at that, which I hadn't thought about till you just said it, was the dissolution of the soft power. Because it is, right? I obviously live here and I obviously like this place, but it's very well packaged and has been for the last 80 plus years of, we're doing this for reasons X, Y, and Z, all of which, the merits and the lack thereof can be debated. You can say it's a least worst empire versus Russia or China. That's all well and good and kind of beyond the scope of this episode. But it's an interesting kind of angle is the dissolution of the soft power of really destroying the PR capability of it. Because, without that, what do we have? And the reality is we don't produce. The reason we were able to win World War II was because of the massive industrial base, the ability to crank out P-51 Mustangs and Liberty ships and tanks. We don't have that now. So in order to keep it cobbled together, it's a very intricate and admittedly impressive PR machine. So if it's going to live by the PR, if you want to kill it, you would want to die by the PR because America still has, regardless if we don't produce things, that still have I would argue a rather sizable military. So how would you go about it? And it would be through soft power. So and it I guess puts a little more stark contrast when you point it out. It's like, yeah, Fortress America receding, kind of pulling back from it, which I'm not even against. And it's, and then what's in our immediate backyard to Canada, Mexico,
Yeah,
Panama,
I'm
Greenland.
actually not against. I'm not against it either. I mean,
Me either.
see,
Yeah, I don't.
real
Yeah,
America first would be great.
it'll be
Trump's
fantastic.
problem. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, if you're pulling in all these things, and it's like, yeah, all this stuff right in our backyard. Mexico, Panama, Greenland, Gaza. You're like, wait, what was that last one? But yeah, Gaza, the one right next to. What are you talking about? That's kind of that's in your face. Then that tells
Well,
you what's
Gaza's just
coming.
right next to Panama.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
right.
it's
It's
right.
just
It's right there. Look at it on a map. It's to me that's like the clearest example of what this is. Do you think that? Just kind of speculating. Do you think that's more of like what the absolutely unhinged, just full-throated defense of the Ukraine war is as well? Do you think that's an attack on soft power? Just in your thoughts?
not really. I mean, I think that the Ukraine war is a good example of how the traditional American imperial establishment has been able to get away with murder, literally and figuratively, by way of that soft power that they've amassed. So they can convince Germany that it's somehow in Germany's interest to destroy Germany's industry by cutting off Germany from cheap Russian energy and forcing Germany to buy grossly overpriced American propane. The only reason that the Americans can get away with that is because the German people have been so brainwashed. Their identity was utterly destroyed by the genocide that, let's just call it what it is, the Jews perpetrated against them. World War II was a Jewish genocide against Germany, not the other way around. Germany was crushed and built back up from the ground up after millions had been murdered, and take their whole identity was stripped from them, and they were brainwashed into this grotesque, psychotic Holocaust religion and America worshiping religion. So they've allowed the United States to just basically be raping them ever since World War II. And once again, the Americans got away with upping the ante on their continuing rape of Germany with this orchestrated Ukraine war, which was basically designed to keep Germany and Russia apart and to destroy both as much as possible. It was a U.S. war against both Europe and Russia. Some could argue that it was more against Europe than against Russia.
Mm.
And the reason that the U.S. could get away with doing this and make money by selling weapons and selling overpriced gas and everything, and screw over both the Russians and especially the Germans, who are the industrial heart of Europe, is that the U.S. has built up this soft power over the years so that the Germans and other Europeans, and to some extent the whole world, they're all brainwashed. They think, oh, the Americans, they're liberal Democrats, they're nice people, they're tolerant. They just want us all to be friendly, civilized people living in democracies with human rights. And so, since the Americans are so nice, whatever they're doing, we're going to just interpret it according to whatever they tell us they're doing. And so that's allowed the United States to get away with its ruthless exploitation of much of the world since World War II. And the Ukraine war is just one example of that. And now that Trump is basically admitting that this is all, we're only in it for our interests, and we're going to steal even more. I think Europe is going to revolt. It won't be long now before Europe actually swings back the other way and is buying Russian gas again without having to go through all these middlemen. And it wouldn't surprise me that much if within a decade, Canada and Europe are openly allied with Russia and China against the United States.
Really?
And that could be happening as the United States currency collapses and Americans start going hungry.
Yeah, that would be I guess the the only thing working towards, I apologize, my throat's so sore. I guess the only thing working against Europe in that, well, I guess this point wouldn't make sense because they could just ally with Russia. But currently is it's not just that, we sell the armaments to Europe. They also don't it's not just that we sell it to, they also don't produce any of it. They don't research it, like all their most advanced stuff. They have some token things. They have like their own, machine guns and tanks, but the real kind of big budget items are all built by
Well,
Raytheon
at least they make
Grumman.
airliners that don't fall apart
Yeah,
while
no,
they're
right?
flying.
And yeah, no, America can't really pitch that right now. It's just that growler, electronic plane plowed into the ocean. Yeah, yeah, it's not that's not a great PR. Yeah, all these points I'm making are like
Yeah, you want to get on
fleeting.
an
They're fleeting.
Airbus. Make sure it's an Airbus, not a Boeing. Yeah,
On a side note, I mean, the Airbus A380 should be Air Force One, because that one's actually kind of, has a sense of majesty to it. But I guess what would be working in America's favor now is something like the F-35. We don't even export the F-22, but like the F-30, kind of the big, and a lot of these forces are the crown jewels of their forces are still made here, and that would be a bargaining chip. But that wouldn't, in a kind of hell freeze over Europe ally with Russia, wouldn't matter because then they would have a new sugar daddy. So I guess my point doesn't really make any sense there. But it does seem to be. I also it doesn't make it right. It is kind of surprising that anyone's shocked that we're brokering a deal where we suck all the rare earth minerals out of Ukraine. Like, what in God's name did you think this was? It's not, it's evil. It's pure evil. I'm not defending it, but I am a little surprised that some people are so shocked at
mm.
the idea
Well,
that
yeah.
we're getting something out of
Some
it.
some people like the fact that Trump is so frank about this stuff, and they say,
Yeah,
"Well, that's great. Uncle Sam has ripped off his mask, and
he
we can
says
see
it like it is.
the
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I like when
yeah,
Satan shows me his face. It's like, yeah, it's not a
exactly,
great pitch, man. It's not a,
yeah,
I like a demon. He's eating a baby right there. You know who he is. It's like, what the fuck did you just say? It is kind of insane. Not kind of insane. It's absolutely
yeah,
insane. So then what does one to do about it? Not to all of a sudden put you on the motivational speaker hat, but
right.
what is one
Elect
to
me
do?
as your next president,
Yeah, and this is why I'm
and I'll
happy
come
to
back from
announce
Morocco." Yeah.
2028, Dr. Kevin Barrett. It's fucked. 2028. What is one to do? I mean, the kind of the metaphysical is, it's, be an instrument of God, be a better person. I get all that, but what is one to do? Because it's all so atmospheric and so far. But we're talking about trillion-dollar alliances and entire nation state militaries. It admittedly you feel a little learned helplessness almost when you go, if I see something's on fire, if there's a homeless shelter nearby, like I can go, I can bring, sheets or, new socks there. Like there's something I can do. This is also, it's happening at 100,000 feet. What is one to even do on like a personal level?
Yeah, that's a good
Not that you
question.
have the answer, but I mean,
No, it's
I'd like to
far
try
from
to,
it.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I wish I could sit here and just crow and say, ha ha, I got out at the right time. I left America in the summer of 2023, 2 months before they jumped in bed with these genocidal lunatics, and committed this most blatantly insane atrocity in the history of humanity. And so I got out, and here I am, hanging out on the Mediterranean beach, real nice house, eating good food, and enjoying learning new languages, or not really new, but brushing up, let's say, on my
sure.
formal Arabic and my Moroccan Arabic, and even to some extent a little bit of French and Spanish. So, hey, wow, I
Yeah,
planned well for my retirement here, even though it wasn't planned at all, really. But
yeah,
honestly, I'm kind of in anguish a lot of the time about a lot of this stuff. I mean, the whole thing pisses me off to no end that I spent 20 years after 9/11 in the United States, and I was asked by National Public Radio in 2006 on the air, well, if you really believe these things about 9/11, why don't you leave the United States? And I said, well, I'll be damned if I'm going to let those monsters
Sure.
drive me out of my own country. And so, I spent 20 years fighting that. And now, having kind of given up on the United States and left, uh, it'd be nice, I guess, if I could say, oh, yeah, well, it worked for me. It's a paradise. I'm happy now. All of that. But honestly, Tommy, I'm still just really not happy with what's going on. And look, the United States crashing and burning like this really bothers me. And yeah, I mean, like you, I find some positive aspects in this so-called Trump revolution. It's a fake America First movement, but it's got a little bit of America First content because it had to be a convincing fake.
Hmm.
And I always thought Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. were about as good as Democrats got. And so there are these aspects of it that uh, I suppose I can understand why there are people who have some kind of hope for some of it, but I don't. Like, I said, I see the U.S. being basically murdered by the Jews. Let's be frank here.
Sure.
I mean, most Jewish people don't have the faintest clue as to you know, how their tribe is participating in this and orchestrating this, because like all tribes, that tribe is totally steered by its cognitive elite, its power elite. All tribes are. So this is not meaning that ordinary Jewish people are
Sure.
particularly to blame for anything. But that tribe, being allowed to emigrate in numbers to the United States, that allowed the leaders of that tribe to take over the United States and basically destroy the United States, is just a really sad thing that happened to what, when I was a kid, was not such a bad country. It was already heading in the wrong direction, I suppose. And so, I left land that my grandmother had bought kind of out in rural Wisconsin by the Wisconsin River. She bought that in, I think, about 1949 or something. And I finally built a log house on it with the help of these sort of Mennonite guys in 2003. And lived there for 20 years. Never thought I would ever leave. Turned it
Yeah.
into really basically my home, the only home I ever had
Yeah.
on ancestral land. And then, because of after 20 years of trying to fix the 9/11 problem and not getting as far as I would have liked to, leaving that place was hard. And from here in, self-imposed exile in Morocco, looking back at what the United States continuing to be murdered is painful for me.
Sure.
And so I'm not, I don't know if I'm any happier here than I would be if I were back in the belly of the beast. So I don't know if I can recommend that people, well, get out, just get out. That's what a lot of folks have said to me. Lynn Din, the great Vietnamese American writer who was then blacklisted for telling the truth about Jews and Zionism, is now back in Vietnam. He was telling me to get out for years, and he thought I made the right move. A lot of other people say the same thing, give up on that godforsaken country, get out. But I'm here to testify that that doesn't necessarily just, cut your ties and make you not care anymore, because I'm still pissed off. In some ways, I'm more pissed off now than I've ever been.
Yeah, no, I don't think it could. It doesn't mean don't go and enjoy your life. Like you're enjoying a new place and learning new things. But yeah, it certainly, I would imagine, doesn't make it easier. I mean, you look at it and like the reason it's like there's a reason you get angry or sad at something. It's because you care, right? If it's, you see, five dead in car crash, like, yeah, it's okay. But if it's someone or even like, over Christmas break, someone I knew from middle school, I hadn't talked to him in 20 years, died. And it just stuck with me for a couple because you're just like, oh, I knew that person. And the reason it evokes an emotional response is because you do on a level, conscious or unconscious, you care. And it's, I've, military friends that are, much my senior, spent their years and their whole lives in special forces, and they've left the US. But there's no like kind of told you so. There's no, like you said, there's no like gloating. It's a lot of deep pain. You have these guys that are like, my dad served, my grandpa served, and it's unbearably painful to see what happened to your home. It absolutely is that. And so I'm with you. There's no gloating in it. You care, right? It's if If you didn't care, you wouldn't feel anything, but you do care, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And but I think maybe there is a little more, there might be a lesson in that. You know, you can move somewhere and you can focus on your life and your immediate circle, your immediate family, you can still enjoy this world and the lessons here and the beautiful God's creation, but it doesn't mean it's not painful. And I think that's kind of it's like the pain probably, it's like that meme, the pain persists, but so do I. And it's like, yeah, you go about life. And I know I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but I think about almost 11 years ago, I lost my older brother to suicide. And as I've gone over the years, I've been corrected by family. I'll be like, yeah, I've kind of moved on. And it's like, you've not moved on. You've just decided to keep living. Like for several years, it was like, man, I'm never going to enjoy Christmas again. And after 4 or 5 years, you start to believe that. You get to year 7, 8, 9, you go, it's a little less painful. And then all of a sudden, you do wake up one Christmas or one Thanksgiving and you go, oh, we thought about him, but it was all smiles. And it's not that I've forgotten him or moved on from him. It's just that, I've decided, hey, I'm 34. Knock on wood, still have a long life ahead of me. I'm not gonna not enjoy Thanksgiving. I'm not gonna not. I don't care about football. I'm gonna watch the Super Bowl. I don't care if it's retarded. I'm gonna watch it. I'm American. I
Yeah.
get it. It's dog shit. The halftime shows are satan. I understand it, but part of me is just I'm at the circus. I'm gonna eat the cotton candy. So I mean, I think there is kind of a lesson in there. There is no silver bullet. There's no place you can go or thing you can do or drug you can take that makes it better, and that's okay. Like it's okay to feel pain. I don't know where I was going with that tangent, but it just
Yeah, no, that's true. That's how it works. When sorry about your loss. That's really really tough.
thank
But
you.
yeah, any huge uh, trauma kind of thing, it will kind of basically you need sabr is what we call it in the Islamic tradition, which is kind of like patient persistence.
Hmm.
The patient persistence to endure and keep striving, and then things change. I suppose I can imagine that after 7 or 8 or 10 years here, assuming I stay here that long and I'm still alive, I could be, I probably would be maybe less tormented. I would assume. I don't know. I could get that much more tormented. I mean, how many more genocide? I suppose the Zionists could go and start genociding Americans, like starting with the women and children, one by one, just going how somehow they've gotten extraterrestrial Jews to come down and go house to house and like slowly murder every American, starting with the women and the children. And I go, okay,
All
you got
right.
me. You did something. It's even worse than what. But I don't see how that's ever going to happen. So
Yeah.
so anyway, 5, 8, 7, 8, 10 years from now, maybe at that point, especially if I were able to just plunge into the Arabic world, that would be easier too. As it is now, continuing to do the work I do uh, keeps me working in English a lot. And I typically, from the first part of my day, I'm working doing my English language work, and then when I'm kind of exhausted towards the evening and stuff, then I move into Arabic for the most part. And if I were just like kind of staying out of English pretty much and just working on the Arabic, and then when my French neighbor comes by talking in French, uh, and I get into developing a an Arabic speaking personality. I kind of have a French speaking personality. I can think in French and stuff and just totally spontaneously be in French, and I can't really do that in Arabic yet. But if I get to the point that I can do that, and so Arabic is a natural, compare almost like a first language or whatever, native competency they would call it. And I'm waking up and thinking in Arabic and doing everything in Arabic. And I see myself like 10 years from now doing that. I could, I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't be tormented by concerns about the United States continuing to have bad things happen to it, like have been going on for so long. But because my job requires me to pour through what's going on in the world with an eye to the really bad stuff that's so bad that mainstreamers can't look at it, and so then I bring that out and present it to you. That's my job. And so it both keeps me kind of tied to America through the English language material and the America focused material that I'm dealing with. and keeps me focused on the really bad stuff. So that's probably kind of keeping me unhappy about what's happening to America more than would be the case if I had like just retired here to live on Social Security and just dropped the English.
Mm.
But maybe 10 years from now, I'll be in that position, inshallah.
Mm. Not to like deviate wildly from the kind of the topic of this podcast, but you said personality. So like I mean I think I took German in college and I barely understood it. But I imagined I was like I bet if you stuck at this for years and decades, you'd maybe it'd start to come more naturally where I wasn't thinking beforehand about the sentence I was gonna say. I'm like, yeah, I bet it gets to a point where it's like English and you just bleh, it just comes out. You said personality. Is that just like a term for that, or do you actually start to like take on like a different like like persona through that language? I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I think it is almost like a slightly different persona.
Really?
Although when I try to stop and think about, well, in my case, like what would be the big difference, I'm not so sure if I could pinpoint it.
Sure.
But it feels like like there is. It's like the language, the way the language works, the way that the vocabulary doesn't match up with the vocabulary of English, and the structure doesn't either. So you're kind of filtering the world linguistically differently when
Mm.
you're operating in a different language. And so when I'm in French now, I'm not like translating from English, at least very rarely. In my mind, I'm just going with the French version of things, and I feel I do see the world a little differently. Uh, and I don't know. I don't know if I would say I almost can sort of relate to this, these French attitudes where they're maybe a little bit more secularist, for
Sort of
instance. Like
relaxed.
you kind of relaxed, and yeah, I feel I almost kind of relate to the French sort of this worldliness in a certain way
Yeah.
when I'm speaking French. And with Arabic, there is this split between the two registers. There's the dialect sort of low register, and then there's the literary and religious high register. And I'm starting to get to the point where I'm a little, I can actually kind of feel that difference. Like, and a native Moroccan speaker, a native speaker here, who's speaking in the slang low dialect, uh, would kind of have a different set of attitudes, and really be a different personality than that same person is when they're discussing religious subjects very seriously, uh, in a more standard or religious Arabic kind of register. So I think we actually, we do this in our own language too, to some extent. Like if you were in a literature seminar in college and you were sort of trying to fit in with these very well educated literary people, you might speak a little differently than, if you were, you went to the bar, God forbid, and we are like, drinking with these working class buddies who never went to college,
Yeah.
a different way of talking. Like I never started talking like a lot of some of my friends in Lone Rock, Wisconsin are, not very educated high school dropouts and
Sure.
stuff. And the local dialect for uneducated people in that part of Wisconsin really is different. It's so different that like, my kids grew up speaking more of a sort of a Midwestern high English based on, they were little kids in the university housing district when they grew up. And they never got influenced really by foreign languages. And yet the local people in Lone Rock who would talk to my kids, even as they grew up and became adults, would wonder whether they might be foreign. And it was because my kids' English is the English maybe that you would hear on television from the news announcer. And the way these people talk in this part of rural Wisconsin, especially if they haven't been to school, is significantly different. So anyway, language does sort of form the character, personality, and so on, and we sort of unconsciously shift into different types of language.
That's well, yeah, no, the first thing I thought was when you mentioned French, the first thing I was like, I wonder if you would take on like a more because that's yeah, again, it's nothing I really thought of. I just figured, yeah, it's like a different language. It's a different. it's just different mode of communication. But it seems to be what you're saying is like it's a different operating system. So, speaking in
Yeah.
French under this idea, yeah, you're a little more just thinking about like sitting under the Eiffel Tower, like yeah, not like me. It's like the American, like New England. Irish Catholic, like work harder, nothing, it's be thankful you're alive. Shut up. It's just like, which I like and it suits me. But yeah, I wonder. And then it started applying, like, well, I wonder how else is it even more hardcore in like China or Japan? And then it's like, is it even more relaxed in like South America or something? It is that's got to be a psychedelic experience to because I had literally never thought about that until now. I'm 34, and you're older than me. Like that's got to be a psychedelic experience to have it dawn on you, and be like, oh wow, that every part of the world is on different operating. So like, holy shit, like
Mhm.
I never thought about that. Sounds
Yeah, yeah, I
fun.
got into
Yeah.
that partly through literary studies. Like people are interested in different things, and I always tested very, very high for things like mathematics, but my family is good in math and bad in languages, and so I think I inherited that. And I'm really not that great in languages, but I'm really I'm interested, and so even though I was kind of a mediocre Spanish student in high school, I continued and studied some languages, and I got interested in French through the poetry of Arthur Rimbaud, and so I was into the rock and roll counterculture at the time, and that one thing led to another, and so I kind of got into the serious foreign languages or the way language forming thought, language as a different operating system thing through French and it was fascinating. There's like there's sort of in France. One thing that's really interesting is there's a strong bourgeois kind of character through the more formal way of speaking. Speaking the way that the Académie Française wants you to speak. They have this language academy, the French Academy, that puts out rules about you don't use these words. These words came from English. You can't use those. Use these words. So that, they're really into their language, and so the bourgeois side of that has this very cut and dried, this is what's correct sort of approach to French, and they're very proud of it. They're very proud of their French, and they love French, and they kind of look down their snouty noses at Americans. And so, if you speak good French, they really like you. So, it's a cool thing about learning French is then they're all, oh, whoa, you are an American who actually
Yeah.
appreciates the wonderful French language.
Yeah.
Here, come over here, and But then the other thing is that there's this low dialect in France too, the gutter dialect, which actually produced the greatest literary writing in the 20th century by the world's greatest all-time literary anti-Semite, Louis Ferdinand Céline. Now, Louis Ferdinand Céline is famous for this incredible literary style that basically he's like spewing out like a lot of obscenity, a lot of argot, French gutter slang. And that gutter slang is really a fascinating language. And it's totally all banned by the Académie Française. And the bourgeois side of the French culture spits on it, looks down at it, says, oh, that's really terrible. But it's super creative. Like all of the, all argot, and a lot, all of that, bad language is often very creative because it's, people suppress their bad thought side. They suppress their obscenity, scatology, dirty jokes, all this kind of stuff is all, you don't say that to polite company, but then it's all bubbling around on there. And so then it can kind of come out in certain circumstances, like if you're hanging out with your low down friends in a
Sure.
bar, and it can be very creative.
Sparks
And
off.
yeah, and the French really have that. And so when I was in France, actually, I was splitting my time between the literary studies with these people who are mostly interested in the very bourgeois literary French. And then I got recruited into this bizarre hoax in which these young guys, like 18, 19-year-old kids from the south of France with a really different way of speaking, had hoaxed the French media into believing that they had been discovered by a famous Hollywood director and cast in an upcoming film. And then they recruited me to pretend to be the director. So I was interviewed by the leading French media outlets who thought I was a famous Hollywood director. This was before the internet, so you could actually do something like
That's
this.
fucking
And this went
awesome.
on for months. Uh, and these kids, with their gutter language from the south of France, and it turns out I learned much later, too late, they were burglars. a couple of them were like burglars, and they would be breaking into these bourgeois French people's houses and stealing stuff. That was how they made their living. So anyway, in their language was not all of them, but some of them, and their language was like really weird and different from Parisian French, but it was more like the saline kind of gutter French.
Hmm.
And the personality was different. They're anarchists. They were into anarchist theory. They're all reading anarchist theory. They're all like 18, 19-year-old kids
Sure.
and listening to the anarchist radio station, which Paris has. So anyway, yeah. So I got in that huge split between those two French-speaking personalities, the literary one, and then the gutter the gutter obscene, anarchist, sort of borderline criminal types. uh,
You you can't be too sad about the state of the world if you still get to have little side experiences like that. Like,
I've,
you
I've
know?
had, God has blessed me with an interesting life. That I'll have
Yeah.
to grant. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, sure, things happening at the big level, not great, and you got to be aware of them, but it's all, yeah, don't forget all the little experience. Don't forget about, faking being a Hollywood director funded by French thieves. Like that's fucking amazing. Like that alone is like, yeah, how could you be too concerned about like I don't know, treaties between NATO and whatever the fuck when like that's happening. So like that's wild, man. That's a
Yeah, well,
wild feeling.
that set me up for doing 9/11 truth work in a way because it
Really?
made me realize how the reason that these stupid French mainstream journalists believed this ridiculous story they were being told by 18-year-old anarchist kids from the south of France.
Mhm.
Well, the original supposed Hollywood director was just some guy, an Australian guy they'd met in a youth hostel, and they talked him into doing this with them. And then he had to go back to Australia. So then they recruited me to be the next incarnation of the director. Christopher Maudson was the guy's name, supposedly, with the non-existent director. And the reason that they were able to sell this to the French media was because the French media wanted it to be true, and so did the audience.
Oh,
See, the French, among their many issue, national psychological issues, is this slight inferiority complex vis-a-vis the British around the pop music success of groups like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Who. Let's face it, the British had better 60s rock bands
sure.
or any era rock bands than the French have had. And the French, like, there's this whole group, and the French love popular music. They love American popular music, but they can't seem to produce these big bands themselves. So for them, having
So
this
it's meaningful.
18-year-old French kids discovered by a famous Hollywood director, cast in his film, they're going to be stars in America. That's like they want to hear that story,
Yeah.
and so they'll just eat it up and broadcast it, and people will believe it because they want to believe it, and that's how it all is. Like with 9/11, who wants to really believe it was some kind of inside job, right? Who wants to believe that Israel did it along with some government? That's just so horrible. If we have to, we're going to have to, we want to believe that this was an evil attack on America so we can love our country and serve our country and all of this stuff. And that's why that NPR interviewer told me, if you don't believe this, if you don't believe the official story of 9/11, why don't you leave the country, right? Because the way, believing that story is so important to American identity, just like believing this story of me being the famous Hollywood director, finding a new group of French young rock stars was really important to the French identity for these journalists. So they would just accept it, even though there was no evidence that it was true. And taking one look at me, they should have known that I was not a famous Hollywood director.
No, that's kind of a brilliant take. I mean, I've like through this podcast, I've learned just how much of just everything. Like if I have someone, on here that I don't, is way above my IQ level and they're going off on molecular biology or something, it more and more it's like, oh, just say less. Just say less and let them talk. Or even just about like reaching out to guests or something. Like if they don't know who I am and it's just face value and I go, hey, I'm this person, I've interviewed these people, I've realized like, oh, like they only know what you show them. And then it starts to, I go, and this is just me. I have no background in this. I have a biology degree. I have no training in this. It's just me in an apartment with no schedulers, no PR people, no producers. It doesn't take too many brain cells to go, what if I had a whole team behind this? What if I stuck at this for years? What if I started doing favor for, I don't know, powerful corporations or governments? And then I start looking at the news and interviews and I go, oh, this is all dog shit. This is what, and that's not to say that there aren't like real interviews out there, but it's made me realize just how much of a production everything is. Like I always think about doing the show and, did I sleep well? Did I have a good workout? I always meditate and pray before the show? Am I clear enough? And then so much of it's like, yeah, no, it exists in this box. No one knows if my kitchen looks like a war zone or if it's clean. No one, I always joke, no one knows if I have pants on. Like, it's just this box. What else in my life do I see as just a box? Who's behind it? Is it something simple like it's, I don't know, one car company fucking with another one? All the way up to the most rarefied air of like, is it selling a false flag to result in a 20-year war? And so, kind of not quite the same, but kind of like what you're saying, a completely unrelated thing that makes something just click. You go, oh, they wanted to believe this. And so it was so receptive. Like, what else do we want to believe, right? We want Trump to come in and say it how it is. And maybe in some places that's good. Like, hey, you can't be chopping kids' dicks off with these surgeries. Like, yeah, that's saying like it is. What else are we getting wrapped up into? And we're gonna take Gaza. And we're gonna take it's like, what no no no. Hold on. What? But if you're kind of wrapped up in the or caught up in the storm and you want to believe it, that's how you'd go along with it. And then it's not until 30 years later you go, what was that about? Like what did we get out of that war? Like why did we take it? Why is there an American like hotel strip in Gaza? That's kind of a wild thing. Yeah, they wanted you to be a director, but that does make it kind of click and you go, well, what else do people want to believe? That's a that's a wild connection you made. That's a brilliant connection. Not to kiss your ass, but that's a brilliant connection you made.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, yeah, and also what they don't want to believe, really. That,
Yeah,
and then if once they start to realize that it's not true,
they don't want to. They don't want.
they aren't in a huge hurry to blow your cover,
No,
like
they don't
because
want it.
like with
They
these
don't want it.
journalists, yeah. The thing was with these journalists that we fooled. Like the very first one was a woman who wrote for was it Le Point, I think it was. Yeah, like the first story about this group was in the Nouvelle Obs, which is like Time magazine there, and the other one was in Le Point, which is like Newsweek kind of. And so the first woman that like interviewed me, who should have known better, totally, uh, published that this big spread on us with a picture of me next to a picture of Tom Waits and Francis Ford Coppola and all these stars that I supposedly knew. I just made up this stuff in this interview. So, anyways, she then later, I happened to run into her like a couple of months later, and by then she'd figured out that it was a hoax. And This was actually the band played a gig, and I actually I came on stage with them, and they introduced me as Christopher Maudson, the famous director and stuff. And after the show, this journalist that I'd fooled 2 months before that approached me and with this kind of very kind of cynical, smile, like said, "Oh, Monsieur Molson, I see you're a man of many talents." Like so she knew, but she wasn't going to blow our cover
Yeah,
because the more more people that get fooled, the less stupid she feels.
yeah,
And so once people have bid on something like that, I mean, even before they reach that point, they're not even going to be skeptical because they don't want to even imagine the
yeah.
possibility that they could have been fooled. Nobody, and we see this with other kinds of scams as well. Like people get swindled and they don't report it even to the police and stuff
Because
because
they feel stupid.
they just feel bad about having been swindled. So
Yeah,
nobody wants to admit that they got taken. And, even if they figure out they probably got taken, they don't really want to publicize it, especially with 9/11. That's if you're in journalism, let's say mainstream journalism, and then you figure that out. If you talk about that, not only are you admitting the fact that you got taken, but also you're blowing up your career and your reputation. So you can sort of see why it's been, a hard slog to get the establishment to face this thing. They
yeah,
have every reason not to.
yeah. No, it is. It's a weird form of passive complicity. You don't. It's yeah. It's easier to fool a man than to convince him he's been fooled. But then it's also like, I mean, if you're just cutting losses, you're like, oh, I've already been fooled. Now, what if there's a financial incentive? It's not just that you've been fooled. It's, you know, uh, Yeah, okay, man, I feel like an idiot. I thought Dr. Barrett was a director and I had him on here. But now let's say I've like, like these shows are, I'm getting whatever, $1,000 in ad revenue. And I'm like, I don't want to get rid of that. Now I have an incentive. I like the now I, and then you could go even farther through it and be like, fuck it. What can I do to help to lubricate the deal? How do I, how do I blow up this persona? And this is just something harmless, like a director. Now what happens when it starts going to like, I'm going to get killed by the CIA if I don't push this story? There is big money at play.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah, this French story, it never got officially blown. That is, even though all of the journalists ended up knowing that it was a
yeah,
hoax,
no one did.
nobody ever published anything saying that it had been a hoax. So
Oh,
basically, for months and months and months, the whole French mainstream media is running this story about this band, the Casse-Pieds, they were called, which means the troublemakers, being supposedly discovered by this famous Hollywood director, Christopher Maudson, who's a good friend of Francis Ford Coppola and all this crap. And it goes, and the movie is called Le Paris d'Amérique, which is a play on words, the Paris of America, or the Bet on America. And that movie's supposed to be coming out this next summer. So this stuff, these stories keep appearing. Dozens of these stories appeared in the French media from like the fall of 1988 through at least the spring of 1989. Never, at least not that I ever saw, did any French media outlet ever do any kind of retraction, or did any French journalist ever publish a story pointing out that the whole thing had been a hoax. What they did was they just stopped reporting it and let it die. you
uh,
know, that's kind of mind-boggling, isn't it?
yeah, because that's the only incentive. Well, I mean, I imagine there's some, they don't want to have to go find a new story, but primarily it seems like the incentive is just no one wants to aid in the bruising of their own ego. That's like, and that
Yeah,
looks, it's like, look what that incentive did. That's a pretty low incentive, and look at what it did. Imagine if the incentive is like, hey, if I push this weapons of mass destruction story, they said I'd get 500 grand a year. I'd have to work 2 days a week for the next 20 years. That's an even bigger one. And then you go even farther, they'd be like, yeah, they're not giving me money. They just said they won't kill my family if I push this story. Dude, that's like a dark unraveling. What an interesting example, though, right? Of where if you can understand the tiniest microcosms of human interaction, you can then understand the whole universe. That's that's wild. That is so above all else, it's just so funny. Like
yeah, yeah.
that's
I
just
actually wrote I
funny.
wrote about this. I wrote about this in my book Truth Jihad. So if you can probably find that book Truth Jihad. For a while it was super cheap on Amazon. It may have gone back up a little bit, but yeah, I wrote about that in that book. And I actually was contacted by one of those guys from the band, like when I hit the media again in 2006, and I briefly got back in touch with him. One of those guys. I don't think he was a burglar though. Became famous later as a Manu Chao. Manu Chao is a French musician. I think maybe he's part Spanish or something. Anyway, he did play with the Caspier band with us some of the time, and then he later became famous and a big star. Um, but I'm not. I do not have any memory of him being among the burglars. So just let me make that perfectly clear.
Legally, we don't know who was allegedly a burglar. That's a wild story, man. That's amazing. But I think it's just it's so true when you realize that when you're behind the curtain, when you're on the stage and you see all the actors, it's kind of one of those things where you go, oh, whoa, how does this apply to the whole world? It absolutely does. And it's,
Yeah, people are just making stuff up as they go along, I guess.
yeah, the whole
And the
thing is
Jews are really
just,
good at it.
and the Jews are really good at it. Barrett
If they wouldn't do such
2028.
terrible things, I would cheer for them. I say, hey, you guys have creative imagination. I love your storytelling. You're good storytellers. Yeah. Oh
Yeah,
boy.
why can't this propaganda ever be used for like getting kids insulin? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's maybe it's like the people that want to deceive you probably aren't doing it for good reasons. No, and how does it apply to everything? It is a while. We've come full circle. Um, but if you don't mind, I gotta meet with somebody else in 10 minutes. We gotta wrap
Yeah,
this
yeah.
up.
Well, go for it.
Dr. Barrett, that was fun, man. I love talking to you. You're a cool guy. For everybody listening, please go in the description. Truth Jihad in the description. Your Substack is in the description as well. Um, and then I don't have Drop. I use WeTransfer. I can send you if you want the copy of this. I can send you a
Yeah,
copy
yeah.
of
That'd
this
be
as
great.
well.
Okay.
Yeah, dude. Till next time.
Cool.
Don't be a stranger, man.
All
Always a
all
pleasure
right. Well,
talking to
thanks,
you about
Tommy.
it.
That's always fun talking.
You too, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
Guys, thank you for